And now we're going to turn our attention to the content of Character Series. Now, Walter Hoy, I know we promised 3 people. Walter Hoy is actually on a train, and I called him on the train. He was going to try to do this meeting from a train, but I have to tell you, after I heard the chug, chug, chug in the background, I said, Walter, it's probably not a good idea. And Kevin McGarry had a conflict that came up. So actually, I think this is a blessing in disguise, frankly, because Pastor Stephen Broden is going to be able to utilize this time wisely, and I have found him to be one of the most intelligent, brilliant black pastors, men that I've had an opportunity to work with. He's the founder and senior pastor of Fair Park Bible Fellowship. It's out of Dallas, Texas. He also has been a representative for the black pro-life movement for decades, and there's really so much more that I could say about him. I wanted to share with you briefly what we are doing here at the Salt and Light Council. I couldn't believe it when we were able to get the name Content of Character as a name for this series. That comes from Dr. and Reverend Martin Luther King. I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they'll not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So our series, which is developed by, I'm just the background, making the PowerPoint presentations and helping to do my part to see this move forward. But they are all very well known in their communities. Pastor Stephen Broden, Reverend Walter Hoy, and Kevin McGarry. Those 2 are from the Frederick Douglass Association. But the whole idea here is to explore the value and dignity of black Americans, and our job at Salt and Light is just to create educational programs that address all these issues that are happening in the black community from a Christian conservative worldview. And why we're sharing this with you now is because we know that you have powers of influence. Your pastor, you can bring these programs to your church. You know, we were talking about it. This isn't just for the black church. Frankly, white America needs to see these programs. It will actually shock you and give you great cause to love, and this racial tension that maybe is being felt is dissipated when you find out how wonderful their rich heritage is. So I hope that you will consider inviting Pastor Broden to your church or to any of your organizations, but put him on your radar screen. And so at this point, I'm going to let him take the rest of our remaining time to, and Pastor Broden, I'm going to say about 20 minutes, and then that will leave us, you don't have to do all 20 minutes. I know we had planned to share this with Walter and Kevin, but as much as you'd like, and leave maybe 10 minutes for any questions and answers that other people will have. And so with that, just tell me when to move the clicker, and I've got your back there, Pastor Broden. And Pastor Broden.
Well, thank you, Diane, for having me, and good evening, folks from Dallas, Texas. And I'm glad to be a part of this meeting tonight. And I won't take 20 minutes, but I do want to share with you guys that we have an opportunity to share information within the community. I think that will help break the stranglehold grip that the progressive movement has on our community. We do that, I believe, by providing information, education, and activation. Information asks and answers the question, what's going on? For many of us, we are being manipulated by an ideological frame that we are totally unaware of. And we need to have the information in order to make wise choices as to what is best for our community going forward. Education asks and answers the question, why is this going on? What's happening here, and why is it happening? And then out of information and education, we believe activation will take place. And the activation is that we will become more engaged politically with information driving the action as opposed to an emotional response being triggered by the progressive movement. The progressive left have had unfettered access to our community. in many instances because of their ability to sympathize with our issues, and particularly an issue of racism, which is a trigger word in our community. And that oftentimes causes a reaction, an emotional reaction on the part of the community because of the reality of racism and its impact in our community over our history with our nation. And so what we have put together here is an explanation, if you will, of how it is that the progressive movement in America has used our community as pawns of change. Pawns of change, that in order for them to achieve their agenda that is fueled by their ideology is to use the poor as a battering ram against the system. And so the progressive, I'm sorry.
You know, folks, would you do me a favor? Would you all check out your phone right now and find mute? Otherwise, I'm going to have to mute everybody. Okay, tell me when to move to the next slide. Would you like me to move
to and no, not yet. But anyway, now that you have, let's go forward. Okay. And so we put together a presentation that demonstrate clearly how the left is using the black community and poor communities in America to advance their agenda. And their agenda is not one that is friendly to our patriotic constitutional system. I am convinced that they're seeking to undermine and to marginalize and eventually overturn the Constitution here in America. Next slide. Do we have animation still on these things? Okay. So one question. Is it in our best interest to fundamentally change? And that was the question that was asked during Barack Obama's campaign, that we are ready to fundamentally change America. And the question we should have asked is to change for what? Or why should we change? And what are we changing from to? What we recognize that the change that was foisted upon us, or the change that they intended to foist upon us, was to change from our Judeo-Christian heritage with a free market system to a socialistic economy and a godless ideology to govern our morals and our values. Next slide. Next slide.
Pastor Broden, I'm going to go ahead and mute the phone, so just hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Pastor Broden, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and punch up the animations through this? And just punch them all up. To answer to the question, what's going on is not right. The impact of liberalism on the culture, organizing for power, manipulating the poor, a moral decline that's taking place as a result of an ideology that's being foisted upon us and is penetrating just about every institution that influence us: academia, the business community, major media, the government, family, and the church. Darwinism, communism, socialism, secular humanism, the destruction of Christian ethics. We see that happening in our culture every day. The disintegration of the family, failure of black leaderships to address the problem of issues in our community, and cultural hedonism. These are the questions and answers that we will begin to answer in this segment of Content of Character as we look at the impact of liberalism in the black community. Next slide. Of course, why is this happening? A historical view of the impact of socialism on the culture will just examine very, in a cursory way, rules for radicals, the Cloward and Piven strategy, the Hegelian dialectic, and political correctness and environmentalism. All these things are driving a transformation in our nation today. And much of its platform for presentation within the culture is happening through the Black community. Transformation of our culture, Black community, is a pawn in their ambition to change America. I think it was Vladimir Lenin that says that the proletariat are useful idiots for them to achieve their goal of changing their nation. Next slide. How do we restore biblical values, and particularly in the Black community? I believe we are a spiritually sensitive community, and one that has its roots in Christianity. How do we change this? How do we get out of this trap that we're in to break what I call the vice grip that the progressive movement has in our community? Activate, resist, educate, and mobilize. These things, perhaps you've heard these things before, but I believe that they need to be employed in our community through a deliberate, targeting effort to transform our community, to break the grip. Next slide. The impact of liberalism on the culture. Of course, this book here has made an incredible impact in the left. It is Saul Alinsky who challenged the left, I believe back in the 50s and the 60s, the 60s in particular, to change, to have a paradigm shift away from Mao Zedong's mantra, is that power happens at the barrel of the gun. Many of you remember, back when I was in college, I went to school at the University of Michigan. I remember that many of the kids or students were carrying around these little red books from Mao Zedong. Some of you may remember that. And the philosophy was revolution and change at the barrel of the gun. Saul Alinsky came along and says, no, that's not the way to do it. And how Saul advocated a paradigm shift was that the left would begin to infiltrate. Of course, Antonio Gramsci also had that same idea, a philosophy out of Italy, had the same idea that you infiltrate the institutions and the community and become a part of the community and a part of the institution, and from within you cause change to take place. And certainly I think Saul Alinsky had framed it in such a way that it captured the imagination of the liberal left, and they began using it. And right now, men and women, the kind of thing that we're seeing take place in Washington, D.C. today inside the FBI and the CIA and the NSA, we have socialists who are inside these institutions, a shadow government, if you will, who are still pushing an ideology that was brought to Washington through the administration of our last president. And there is a conflict of a titanic proportion that is happening right now in our culture. And much of it is out of the design of Saul Alinsky. Next slide. When you're organizing for power, Saul Alinsky says you agitate, aggravate, educate, and organize. Three kinds of people in his world: the rich and powerful and oppressors, the poor and disenfranchised, and the middle class whose apathy perpetuates the status quo. That's their 3,000-foot analysis of how we look to them, their analysis of our culture and how to infiltrate it and to change it. Next slide. Saul Alinsky says the revolutionary's goal is to mobilize the poor and the oppressed as a battering ram to bring down the system. Barack Obama was presented to us as a community organizer. Where did he spend his time organizing? He organized in the poor communities of Chicago. And it's out of that he was able to go and demand from the system certain things that were designed to tax the system and burden the system, getting as many people on welfare as you can in order to burden and tax the people, producing more dependency on the system out of demanding from the system to meet the needs of the poor community. This is a tactic, and it was very successful. Is there any more to this slide? I think there may be another animation here. And so what we see, men and women, is that there is a deliberate effort on the part of the progressive left to utilize the poor to accomplish their purposes. Alinsky trained his people that politics is all about power, relation. But to advance one's power, one must couch one's position in the language of morality. Here again, the liberal left has found a sympathetic ear within the black community and poor communities because they elevate their concerns within the community, housing, food, other goods and services that should be in the community that's not there for various reasons. And so they become the champion of the community, and they become the moral voice of the community because of their ability to organize and to demand from the system. Change is brought about through relentless agitation and troublemaking of a kind that radically disrupts society as it is. I would ask you to consider Black Lives Matter and the tactics that we see them using. This is straight from the playbook of Saul Alinsky. Agitate, aggravate, organize, marching. And with the money from George Soros, they're able to pull it off. Now, there can be no conversation between the organizer and his opponent. They're not looking to have a conversation. In many instances, we who are on the right are looking to engage in conversation and try to work things out they're not looking to try to work things out. Their ultimate goal is to overthrow, to disrupt, and to replace. We see that happening now in many of these town hall meetings that many of our politicians that are Republicans are going back into their communities, into these town hall meetings, and they're being confronted with rules for radicals. Saul Alinsky tactics to aggravate, disrupt, and to produce chaos and demand that their interests, their agenda be taken up by the elected official. The organization is focused, and they move inexhaustibly from one issue to the next. We see that. They taunt one's opponent to the point that they are labeled as dangerous enemies. In other words, they will begin to call you names and begin to tag you with false information. And it sticks because the media is obviously working on their side as well. And this is what's happening in the public square. Many of us who are Tea Party patriots remember back in 2010 that many of us who were Tea Party candidates who were running were labeled as AstroTurf. We were labeled as tea baggers, and there were other names that they were calling us, including revolutionaries who are looking to overthrow the system. Next slide. Here's what is happening as you look into the black community. This is why they're so successful in the black community, in our community. Because they take legitimate grievances and use them to make unreasonable demands. If you look back over the years, and by the way, this has been going on in our community for years. In the 20th century, as early as the 1920s, up to our present day situation. The civil rights movement, Jim Crow laws, second-class citizens, these were issues that were in the black community that were legitimate issues. Jim Crow laws relegated our community to second-class citizenship. Drinking at water fountains that were designated for coloreds only, and bathrooms that were designated for colors only. Segregation and that type of thing. Those were legitimate concerns and issues in our community. And of course, the champion and the voice that organized the community were those who were from the socialistic, liberal, progressive movement. Social justice, political correctness, tolerance, LGBT, all of these. Social justice is a term that most of us, when we hear it, it makes sense. We want to have social justice. But social justice means something totally different to the progressive and to the socialist. Social justice, as a pastor, I tell my congregation all the time that social justice is different from biblical justice. The two are not the same. One is driven by an ideology that is devoid of the divine perspective, that exalts and elevates doctrines of men, or what Paul calls in 2 Timothy chapter 3, doctrines of demons. Equal access, discrimination, these are legitimate concerns. Abolishing slavery, citizenship to slaves, all of these were legitimate issues and concerns. But when you have a wolf who comes among the sheep and begin to pick up their issues in order to lead the sheep away from the traditional values that undergirds the community, you get what you got now in the black community, a mess. Next slide. Many of you understand the nanny state has a negative impact on our economy and on our community. It produces dependency. The welfare state destroys family, produces unhealthy dependency on the state. It kills innovation and creativity. There's no question about it. What you see in our community is the result of welfare, the war on poverty of the 1960s. Before the 1960s, black families were intact, fathers and mothers with children in their homes. When the welfare state showed up, the federal government says you can receive a fat check, housing allowance, and food stamp if there's no man in your home. And it broke the family up. The statistics show now that in the black community, upwards to 70% of the homes are single-parent homes. And statistically, you know as well as I, single-parent households are more likely to exist in poverty than a two-family household. The nanny state dictates human behavior and conduct. We are in a mess because the progressive movement has implemented these kinds of programs in our community for the purpose of advancing their doctrine in America. Next slide. We're witnessing a moral decline. There's no question about it. When you replace the Judeo-Christian ethic that represents, I believe, innovation and creativity, it promotes stable homes, and it promotes growth and development. within our communities across America, and a kind of morality that is consistent with the Judeo-Christian ethic that is represented within the Word of God. It has been systematically replaced, not only in our culture in America, but it is penetrating and moving almost unfettered in our community. Let me give you an example. Before Barack Obama took office as President of the United States, homosexuality was not an acceptable lifestyle within the black community. Most black communities, say upwards to 80% of most blacks, were disapproving of same-sex marriage before Barack Obama took office. And through his influence and charisma and badgering, if you will, it is now down to 48% are against same-sex marriage. Our values have changed and are changing as a result of a systematic displacement of or reduction of the influence of the Judeo-Christian frame within our community. Christianity is under assault in America, and there's no place that it is evidencing itself dramatically as it is within the black community. The influence is being diminished, particularly among the millennials and young people who are being indoctrinated with an atheistic frame of reference in most of the academic institutions that they are attending, from elementary school right on up to colleges and universities. And they're being replaced with this whole idea of Darwinism, socialism, communism, secular humanism, and all those isms, men and women, are anti-God systems developed by men who were atheistic and God haters. It was Karl Marx who said, "My goal in life is to destroy capitalism and to dethrone God." And if you look closely, God is being dethroned in America.
Pastor Broden, we're getting pretty close to the hour. We try to wrap up our meeting at 7 o'clock, and it's about 3 minutes before. So I just wanted to let you know, I'm a little bit over for question and answers, but just to let you know.
Okay, let's stop there. The presentation goes on this way by giving information that will help the average black American who is victimized by this whole progressive movement to understand what it is and the philosophy behind what it is that they're doing that has produced the kind of melees and madness that is happening in our community, and the kind of blind loyalty that is given to the progressive movement and to the Democratic Party, because they are using language and using legitimate concerns in our community to foster support and to promote their own agenda. I'll just stop there.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pastor Broden. These are just a few example slides. Believe it or not, this is about 10 slides, but his slide total presentation is about 48 slides. So we're looking at about a 3-hour presentation, but it goes over every aspect of how the strategy is, what they're using, including environmentalism, the Hegelian dialectic, Cloward-Piven. There's much, much more in this program. So it's about 3 hours if you were to have him be a speaker in your church. But he can tailor, of course, all of his slides to any length presentation. And so we just put that out there to you. This took us 2 years to do, folks. There was nothing easy about it, but it was utterly enjoyable to get to know Pastor Broden and to understand his heart for America. And I guarantee you, folks, this program needs to be heard, both by the white community and the black community. And so anything that you can do to have him be a speaker, we would really appreciate and have you contact us. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to go to the next slide here. Partner opportunities on the Content of Character series is commit to a training program to learn how you can present these programs. If you want to be a trainer, we would love to do that. Elvin out of Oklahoma, I know you're here on the phone with us. This is one of those opportunities I think that you'd be perfect for. We would, again, like you to invite our speakers to be present at your church or in your organization, to present, that is. And lastly, it takes a lot of money to try to, promote what we're doing. We made up flyers. We've done these PowerPoint slides. It has cost us a tremendous amount. So believe me, anything at all that you can do to help Salt and Light will go to great use for these pastors. So that's it. And what I'd like to do is now go ahead and open up for just a few questions and answers. I know that we're at the end of our time at 7 o'clock, and some of you, we always promise to be done right at the hour. And for those of you that have to leave, please feel free. But for those of you that would like to ask a question, go ahead and hit *6. *6. Now, if that doesn't work, I'll go ahead and unmute all the phones, and as long as there isn't a lot of background noise, we'll keep on going. So go ahead and try *6 and ask your questions of Pastor Broden. And meanwhile, while somebody is *6ing, just let me know you're coming there. Our next meeting will be April the 17th. And Gail, we haven't finalized who we're going to have for that, right?
Actually, we have. Let me go there. Hang on 1 second.
Is anyone able to unmute themselves? *6.
Hey, Dran, this is Barry Webster. Pastor Broden, I guess I have a question. Dran said this is for really all audiences, but what would you say is the ideal audience that you've targeted this material for?
Ideally, again, I do believe it's information that is applicable to all audiences, but I am looking to try to present this to as many pastors and spiritual leaders so as to give them an analysis, an awareness, and an understanding of what's happening in our community. I think most of the community is oblivious to the socialist movement and the progressive movement and what they're all about. And that may be true for most Americans to the extent that they're not aware of how these tactics are being exercised in our culture today. So I do believe it's good for leaders to know because out of them comes an opportunity to influence their congregation and others to become actively involved in recognizing their power given to us by the Constitution to influence our government and to change the direction that our government may be going in by electing servant leaders to go and represent our best interest in Washington, D.C.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Any other questions?
Dran, it's Gail. We do have a speaker next month. It's Dan Smithwick from the Nehemiah Institute, and biblical worldview is something that everybody's talking about. We've been doing it for years, and he's going to talk about worldview assessments and a school for biblical worldview next month in April. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail.
Pastor Broden, this is Eric. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Pastor Broden, thank you so much for all the years and efforts that you've put into educating people on the true history and the issues affecting the civil rights movement and black history. I have a quote today that was mentioned actually from our pastor in church on Sunday. I thought it was interesting because it runs parallel with what you're saying. Harriet Tubman, who we all know from the Underground Railroad, made a statement at the Suffrage Convention in 1896. She said, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." We don't want to lose our passengers.
Amen. I think that's a wonderful quote. And certainly I think it helps us who are on the line tonight, who are engaged in the rescue of our republic.
Yes.
That we must stay focused and that we win this battle, this war, I should say, one battle at a time. And I think part of that effort begins with education and information, which will in turn activate people who are now, in many instances, just oblivious to what's going on. They see this thing and they're uncomfortable with it, but they don't understand what is happening. And much of the message is being framed by a liberal media that is sold out to the left. And so they are branding our message, branding who we are, branding our efforts to try to rescue the republic as something that is ignomatic and outside the norm. And we need to fight back and do the best we can with what we have, but we must fight.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions for Pastor Broden? All righty. Well, I'm going to go ahead and unmute all the phones. I think. I'm not really sure if I did that right. Did I? Well, anyway, Pastor Broden, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the evening. Once again, thank you so much, Pastor Broden. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you. And may our efforts...
Well, thank you for having me and having this opportunity to speak to your group. It sounds like you guys are doing extraordinary things, and may God bless you all in your effort to educate and to mobilize a saving force for our nation.
Well, I appreciate that, Pastor Broden. These are a very unique group of individuals. They have undertaken to do the hard stuff. Every day they get up there and they care about our nation, and they're trying to do exactly what you said, rescue our nation, rescue, and they start with prayer. And so I do hope, and I do pray and wish that we had more Salt and Light ministries in every church in America. And I don't know if you were on the phone when you heard me read a letter from a church in Colorado that the pastor actually wrote to us and told us his excuse why he can't have a ministry. And while I do appreciate so many pastors and the work that they do out there, I simply cannot get clear on any excuse not to be engaged in all the world. That's what it says in Ephesians, to be involved in all the world, not a portion of it. And we've conveniently thrown out government, and it continues to be the one evil force that is taking us down. And I don't know when we're going to turn it around and decide that this is the place we have to be. So until that time, there's just a few of us out there. It's the remnant. You're the remnant. All of you folks on the phone are the remnant. And I ask that the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon all of you. You are the apple of his eye, and I just can't thank God enough for you. So never, ever, ever, ever give up in the name of Jesus. Amen. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.